It is this notion of sacrifice for the good of the whole in this case being the forest, that puts the silver birch at the beginning of the ancient Celtic alphabet named Ogham. Now, this alphabet was at once a written language and also a multi-dimensional discipline. The physical, mental and spiritual attributes of the 20 trees that make up the alphabet are all clearly identified, and druid initiates would first have to go through the birch discipline to learn how to play the game of life holistically before going on to learn the other powers offered by the other trees and their associated underworld cosmology. Now, as we go through this transitional period, we find that there are most definitely two worlds occupying the same space. One of these worlds is heading rather rapidly into a rather nasty wall, and people are jumping ship as they wake up in ever-increasing numbers. Human interaction is progressively more difficult in the first of these worlds, and does actually require electronic devices to be able to communicate with people quite often when they're in the same room. And the same communication is becoming a lot more fluid and easy on the other world as we become more and more attentive of each other and our interrelational connections, thus removing the need at last for hours and hours of debate and meetings before doing 10 minutes work together. As I said, there are definitely two worlds out there, but don't forget, the final score is that we are all here just learning and experiencing each other, so when we cross paths and communicate with each other, no matter which world we are in, it should be to learn something that the other person has observed or experienced. The reason why we have two eyes, two ears and only one mouth is to be able to listen and look twice as much as we speak. It's all about emptying yourself of all that interior noise that you call thinking and learning to absorb information from apparently elsewhere. Especially, and I can't stress this enough, when the other person immediately pisses you off, try to maintain the reflex of where is the silver lining amongst all this cloud. However, don't let that reflex become a knee-jerk dogmatic reaction either. Sometimes the inner scream of "run away as fast as you fucking can" is completely justified. In this case, just remember that the sperm of the devil you just met may well be one of God's infinite creations and may well be one day reconciled with infinite love, but it might not actually be your niche to help them attain it, and definitely not today. There are some scumbags out there that even Hannibal Lecter would have a hard time understanding. However, as you accept your multi-dimensionalness, you will also gradually get to know your ego more and more closely, and you will come to recognise when it starts whinging. There is a particular tone or a set of words and certain mechanisms involved, and most of it is pure knee-jerk, and you can actually catch yourself in the act. Now, at first this is a bit worrying, but don't panic. Most people don't even notice, and those that do already have a level of compassion sufficiently high enough to forgive you and not judge you over that pile of automatic invisible puke you just spat out onto the floor in front of everybody. When you knee-jerkingly refuse information, it is normally because you were about to learn something that was going to require very deep and painful introspection. If you do run away from a subject and it keeps coming back onto the table regularly, do give it a good going over and another until you either change your mind or trench yourself in for good. Now, sometimes we have quite intense and enjoyable encounters with other people, and then ploof, the magic suddenly stops, and this is because the information exchange is suddenly complete between you. That empty sensation means it's time to move on and leave it on that nice note, rather than wearing it out. It's better to go off in different directions with a large majority of good memories of each other's to share with other human beings, rather than letting it turn toxic and then unloading all your unnecessarily accumulated pain on all of your future encounters. Now, within any two people, there is always some common ground. Sometimes it is only a small percentage of yourselves, like breathing oxygen and drinking water, and sometimes it's quite a lot. Now, when we get above about 50% of common ground, we start to call these people our friends. If the non-common ground makes you rant onto other people in a negative way about somebody, you are not helping the situation. If we are going to pull together as a species, we are going to have to achieve this on the micro level for it to express itself on the macro level. focus on the good points that other people have, and let's put the differences that derange to one side until we are at least out of the frying pan, having successfully avoided the fire. And that goes for all the useless arguments about defining exactly who the fucking them are, whether or not to eat meat, cheese, eggs, milk, etc., or what fucking shape you believe the planet is. Whatever cosmology you have created or adhered to, we are all okay about the nature of the problem on the physical level, as I described it in part 1. If we could circulate freely at will and in total synchronicity, the positive information exchange would become exponential and humanity would once again function as a whole organism. And believe it or not, I do believe we are slowly getting there. Now, back on the physical level, we still have many needs to fulfill, and despite local purchasing, gardens, hours banks, alternative education proposals, tolerance and general enlightenment and the rest, the them are still getting a fair-sized chunk of our energy every day, and this is because of group decisions made by the few for the many, or what we call politics. So, let's dare to take a look at these politicians and try and pull some sense out of this quite deliberate mess. Don't forget, popular politics took over from religion and lordy-pantses as a control system when Darwinism and socialism germinated and technology began to flourish. The original idea was that all people would have an equal say in how things are run. But what actually happened was yet another typo error, just like the Jesus episode and the paranoia thing. Instead of everyone having a say in how things are run, the democratic constitution ended up being written as everyone gets a say in who runs things. And to decide who runs things, we have elections, and here we see that the lack of correct typing ability continued unabated as the S at the beginning of the word disappeared forever. You see, we don't make decisions and we don't really elect anybody. We just choose one of a pair of masters selected to make decisions for us. Now, at first, and on the face of it, of course, while sporting a rather large pair of beer goggles, this seemed like a fairly good idea. I mean, you can't actually have everyone in an area as big as, say, a whole bloody country actually deciding everything now, can you? It's just too big, and opinions, needs, etc. are too diverse from one territory to the next, and there are just too many damn people. So we then have these selected representatives who uphold certain ideas and ideals, and they write up their manifesto, and then we have a bloody good vote on it, and we select a king or queen who wins the right to rule for 5 years. It is at least more entertaining than hereditary monarchy was, which was by definition rather monotonous, and in the absence of interfamily assassinations, incredibly predictable. The first thing to realise in all this is that if someone stands up and asks you to vote for them and give them your power, and that's anything above local councillor, and that you can personally hold them accountable, be very, very careful. You see, politics should be a local duty and not an international career move. The person who presents themselves for presidency or equivalent is a pure manifestation of all things bad. They are, in fact, the kidney stones of the whole. They cannot, by definition, be good. If they were, they would not be up there, putting themselves up there for power, and getting rid of them is going to involve a slow, agonising process and probably lots of birch trees. Now, for me, the most touching scene in the book The Lord of the Rings is when Samwise Gamgee, alone on the borders of the Black Land, refuses the temptation of the One Ring, that's the ego of the whole, as it offers him the power to order the healing of the world to his own will and turn it into a beautiful garden. "My own hands to work," he says, "and not those of others to command." He pockets the ring as a simple physical burden and heads on faithfully into the darkness of Mordor to continue the errand assigned to his master. Power over others is a corrupting force right from the moment you lust after it, and if you lust after it enough, it will make you do anything. If decision-making was a duty that you got randomly called up for, like jury service, or you were called in to advise on something because you're actually an authority on a fucking subject, well, that would change a lot of things. I mean, when was the last time that the Minister of Work was a worker, or that the Health Minister was a doctor, or that the Environment Minister was an ecologist, or that the Agricultural Minister was a farmer? when will the foreign minister be a foreigner? You see, politics has always been the realm of professional power wielders who learn political science at university before being selected to become members of secret societies and promptly pushed into position by hidden hands. When you get down to the idea of randomly selecting people from the public to decide things or scrutinise decision makers, you do need to remember that real people aren't that inherently stupid. Quite the opposite, in fact. If we got rid of all the bad influences and had some real education, we might quite quickly come to live in a world where the man or woman in the street is capable of taking day-to-day important decisions for the rest of us at some level for a given period of time. In any case, with all of the ridiculous communication devices that we now have to keep us even more in the dark than we ever have been, real participative, transparent, traceable democracy is at least technically possible. The original problem of working out how to decide what happens at a national level is very easy. We dissolve the nations and become bioregions. More on that shortly. If we followed a natural fractal pattern like that of a tree or of a river, the democratic pattern could work something like this. Each household, that's the leaves, is democratic in its decision-making. The household, full of healthy, aware, conscious individuals, makes daily decisions that must be taken within the household. The higher the order in the pattern, the higher the level of sovereignty. Each household then selects a member who represents the household on a neighbourhood council. So we get into a group of leaves. And each neighbourhood is also sovereign as to what goes on within, following a minimum of guideline rules from the trunk. Infrastructure such as energy, recycling, keeping the street clean and the roads in good condition, etc. Everything that happens in the neighbourhood should be decided and done by the neighbourhood. And then each neighbourhood could select a representative, again based on niche competencies, to decide what happens in the village or town sector, and so on, up through to bioregions and an international parliament. That's parliament, not government. It has been suggested that no one member of an international parliament should speak for more than 50,000 people, and as we go down, not up, through the levels of representative power towards the trunk, the number of decisions to be taken must become less, even though their importance is a lot higher. Now, the verbal resemblance to the predicted one world government a la David Icke, or even worse, a la Alex Jones, is quite astounding. But like I said earlier, that Aquarius energy is going to unite us one way or the other. That is the period of universal energy transition we are currently experiencing, and we are definitely not evolved or powerful enough to manipulate our reality otherwise. The question of the day remains, yet again, is it going to be together on our terms or together on their terms? Now, the one world parliament needs to be fractally proportionate. The smaller the unity of the society, the higher the level of sovereignty, and the more decisions will be taken, but the import of the decisions is a lot less significant to the whole, even if these daily acts in the micro level are then reflected on the macro level. Decisions such as what will we eat today will not be decided by an international parliament. However, if we let them put their one world government in place, they will decide what you eat every day, and it will be GMO, soya-derived industrial shit. All getting together and banning blanket destruction tools, child labour, wife-beating, wars, nuclear weapons, and setting limits to individual economic growth and deciding such things as the level of the universal revenue, those are the decisions to be discussed down below in the trunk, and then voted on by universal referendum. The word Parliament is Order 1. It's the trunk of the tree. It doesn't decide anything. It is just a forum for discussion in plain language to be publicly scrutinised before referendums. We are unfortunately a long way off from this level of cooperation, but with surprises like Donald Trump in the White House, who could predict the future anymore? I mean, personally, I think this last wave of strong characters in power will either start to relocalise power as they promise, or they will fail of their promise just like all the others and sound the final wake-up call for humanity as the world population finally realises there is no future in politics of this kind, and we set about rewriting the Constitution on Facebook.